Humanity's last gasp was stolen right out of their lungs as alien harvester ships drained Earth's atmosphere dry. Dr. Greg Hall choked on nothing, his vision blurring as he clawed out from under the smoldering rubble of the Kennedy Space Center. Immense saucer-shaped craft hovered in the Florida sky, violet beams lancing down, sucking away the precious oxygen. People collapsed in the streets, twitching and foaming, faces purple. Cars crashed and planes dropped from the heavens. As quickly as it began, the attack ended. The alien ships disengaged, soaring up through the mesosphere, leaving 7 billion suffocating in their wake. Greg gasped, drawing in meager whiffs of air. His head pounded. Nausea gripped his stomach. He knew mere minutes remained before hypoxia stole his consciousness for good. Wobbling to his feet, he beheld utter devastation. Smoke columns rose across the horizon, the distant screams of the dying haunting the wind. He shook his head, fighting off the blackness encroaching on his vision. Questions raced through his oxygen-starved brain. Who were these aliens? Why did they take our air? How could we get it back? Suddenly, a hand clamped on his shoulder. He whirled to see Mike Simmons, his best friend and fellow engineering lead. Blood caked one side of Mike's face, his lab coat torn and filthy. But a fiery determination blazed in his eyes behind his cracked glasses. "The harvesters," Mike wheezed. "Their tech. It's the key. We have to infiltrate, find a way." Greg nodded, understanding. Earth's stolen atmosphere was on board those ships. If they could somehow reverse the process, siphon it back. But they needed to act fast before the last pockets of breathable air vanished for good. Humanity's fate now rested in their shaking hands. This was no longer about mere survival. It was time to show these alien bastards what humans were truly made of. Greg and Mike exchanged a determined nod, their lungs burning as they scavenged what little breathable air remained. The alien harvester ships had long since disappeared into the stratosphere, but the devastation they left behind was all-consuming. Everywhere they looked, people lay dead or dying, their faces contorted in anguish. They made their way through the rubble-strewn streets of Cape Canaveral towards the smoldering ruins of the Space Center. If any remnants of the alien technology had survived the attack, they would find them there. As they approached the shattered launch pads, a figure emerged from the shadows, a lanky creature with mottled green skin and bulbous black eyes. It raised its spindly arms in a gesture of surrender. "Please," it said in halting English, "I am Xenos. I wish to help." Greg and Mike exchanged wary glances, but desperation overrode suspicion. They needed all the allies they could get. In the days that followed, a ragtag team of scientists and engineers coalesced around Greg, working tirelessly to unravel the secrets of the pack-led technology. Dr. Samantha Chen, a brilliant xenobiologist, took the lead in studying xenos in the captured alien specimens. "Their physiology is incredible," she marveled, peering through an electron microscope. "These specialized organs allow them to extract dissolved oxygen directly from water, like fish gills." Greg's mind raced with possibilities. If they could replicate that process using the alien tech, maybe they could turn the tables on the Packlids. Meanwhile, Mike led strike teams in daring raids against Packlid outposts, recovering precious reserves of stolen oxygen. Each canister they liberated meant a few more hours of life for the suffocating masses. But the Packlids were learning, adapting their tactics. The humans needed a game changer, and fast. "We have to capture one of their leaders," Greg said, poring over intercepted alien transmissions. "Admiral Zorgax, the one who ordered the attack. If we can bring him in alive, force their hand." It was a risky move, but they were out of options. In a meticulously planned operation, Greg and Mike's combined forces ambushed Zorgax's convoy, subduing his guards and dragging the snarling admiral into custody. They imprisoned Zorgax and his entourage in a reinforced pressure chamber, with a hastily constructed water tank looming over them. The meaning was clear: cooperate or drown. Faced with this grim ultimatum, the Packlids agreed to a tentative ceasefire. Tense negotiations began, with Greg and Samantha working frantically to perfect the water extraction process. Trust was a scarce commodity, paranoia running high on both sides. Some human and pack-led factions schemed in the shadows, determined to reignite the conflict for their own ends. As Greg toiled through sleepless nights, bathed in the glow of alien monitors, he finally understood what they were up against. This was more than just a battle for survival. It was a struggle to redefine the very nature of life on Earth. They had the tools, the knowledge, the raw materials. Now it was up to them to forge a path forward, one breath at a time. The ceasefire brought an uneasy calm to Earth's ravaged surface. In a hastily constructed laboratory on the outskirts of Cape Canaveral, Dr. Greg Hall hunched over a modified pack-led filtration system, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Beside him, Dr. Samantha Chen adjusted the parameters on a holographic display, her fingers dancing across the alien interface. "Oxygen saturation at 72%, Samantha announced, a hint of excitement in her voice. "That's our best result yet." Greg nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "We're getting close. Xenos, what do you think?" The lanky pack-led scientist shuffled closer, his bulbous eyes fixed on the readout. "Impressive progress, but we must increase efficiency. Our people cannot survive much longer on rationed air." As if to underscore the point, a distant explosion rocked the building. Alarms blared, and security personnel rushed past the lab's reinforced doors. "Another attack?" Greg muttered, frustration evident in his tone. Samantha's communicator chirped. She frowned as she read the message. "Pack-led loyalists. They hit one of the auxiliary research stations." Greg thumped his hand on the workbench. "Damn it! How are we supposed to save both our species if they keep trying to kill us?" Before anyone could respond, the lab doors hissed open. Mike Simmons strode in, his face grim. "We've got bigger problems. General Stanton's making his move." Greg's blood ran cold. He'd heard whispers about the Earth First movement, but he'd hoped they were just fringe extremists. "What's happening?" Mike activated a holographic display, showing footage of armed militants storming government buildings. "They're calling for the execution of all pack-led prisoners and the termination of the peace process. Half the military's already pledged allegiance to Stanton." Xenos recoiled, his mottled skin paling. "This cannot be allowed. If the ceasefire fails—" "I know," Greg cut him off. "We need to accelerate our timeline. Samantha, contact Dr. Khoury. Tell her we need that targeted gene therapy ready yesterday." As Samantha rushed to make the call, alarms blared again. This time, the entire building shook. Emergency lights flashed, bathing the lab in an eerie red glow. "Perimeter breach," a panicked voice shouted over the intercom. "All personnel evacuate immediately." Greg met Mike's eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. "Get Samantha and Xenos to the secure bunker," Greg ordered. "I'll grab what we need from the lab." As his friends reluctantly left, Greg frantically gathered data drives and critical components. He was about to follow when the lab doors exploded inward. Through the smoke strode a tall, imposing figure in military fatigues. "Dr. Hall," General Stanton's voice dripped with contempt, "your treason ends here." Greg backed away, his mind racing. He needed to buy time, to give the others a chance to escape. "This isn't treason, General. We're trying to save humanity." Stanton laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "By cooperating with the very aliens who tried to exterminate us? No, Doctor. The only way forward is to crush these invaders and take their technology for ourselves." "You're wrong," Greg countered, edging towards the emergency exit. "We can learn from each other, find a way to coexist." A burst of gunfire cut him off, bullets ricocheting off the lab equipment. Greg dove behind a workbench, his heart pounding. As Stanton's men advanced, Greg's hand closed around a canister of pressurized pack-led atmosphere. With a silent prayer, he hurled it at the soldiers and ran. The resulting explosion rocked the lab, giving Greg the opening he needed. He sprinted down smoke-filled corridors, alarms blaring in his ears. He had to reach the others, had to protect their research. The fate of two worlds depended on it. As Greg emerged into the chaos outside, he saw Samantha waving frantically from a waiting transport. He pushed himself harder, lungs burning, as bullets whizzed past. Just a few more steps. A searing pain erupted in his leg, sending him sprawling. As darkness crept into his vision, Greg's last conscious thought was of the vital data secured in his pocket. He had to get it to safety, had to finish their work. The future of both species depended on it. Greg's eyes fluttered open, his vision blurry. The sterile white of a hospital room slowly came into focus. Samantha Chen sat beside his bed, dark circles under her eyes. "Welcome back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You've been out for 3 days." Greg tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his leg. "The data—" "Safe," Samantha assured him. "And it paid off. We've had a breakthrough." She activated a holographic display, showing a complex molecular structure. "We've modified the Pac-led oxygen extraction technology. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Greg studied the diagram, his mind racing with possibilities. This could change everything. A familiar voice spoke from the doorway. "Indeed it could, Dr. Hall." President Amelia Alvarez strode into the room, flanked by security. Her face was grim but determined. "We're implementing your research immediately, but we have a new problem." She gestured and footage appeared on the holodisplay. It showed armed militants storming oxygen facilities, human and Pac-led alike. "General Stanton?" Greg asked, his stomach sinking. Alvarez nodded. "And his Pac-led counterpart, Commander Vax. They're sabotaging our peace efforts." Samantha's communicator chirped. She read the message, her eyes widening. "It's Xenos. He says Admiral Zorgax's daughter wants to help us." Greg exchanged a look with Samantha. "Looks like we're not out of the fight yet." Days later, Greg found himself crouched behind a rocky outcropping, peering at a heavily fortified compound. Beside him, Samantha checked her equipment while Zara, the Pac-led defector, adjusted her breathing apparatus. "Vax's base," Zara whispered, her alien features twisted with disgust. "My father's lapdog." Greg nodded, studying the patrol patterns. "We get in, capture Vax, get out. Simple." Samantha snorted. "When has anything ever been simple?" They moved under cover of darkness, disabling security systems with Zara's inside knowledge. Alarms blared as they breached the inner sanctum, but Greg's modified stunner dropped the guards before they could react. In the command center, they found Vax surrounded by screens displaying attack coordinates. The Pac-led commander reached for a weapon, but Zara was faster. She tackled her former superior, pinning him to the ground. "It's over, Vax," Greg said, securing the Pac-led's arms. "Your war ends now." As they led Vax away, Samantha downloaded critical data from the base's computers. "We've got names, locations, the whole extremist network." Back in Washington, President Alvarez wasted no time. With Vax and other hardline leaders in custody, she convened an emergency session with moderate Pac-led representatives. "We stand at a crossroads," Alvarez addressed the assembled delegates, human and alien alike. "We can continue down the path of mutual destruction, or we can forge a new future together." She outlined her proposal for the Interstellar Alliance for Oxygen Solutions. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as the implications sank in. A Pac-led diplomat rose, his bulbous eyes fixed on Alvarez. "And you would trust us with such power? After what we've done?" Alvarez's gaze was steady. "Trust must start somewhere. We're all breathing the same air now." The vote was close, but in the end, the IAOS was approved. Greg found himself heading up a joint research team, working alongside Pac-led scientists he once considered enemies. In a state-of-the-art lab, Greg and Xenos pored over data from a comet mining operation. Nearby, Samantha coordinated with a Pac-led engineer on atmospheric replenishment models. "Oxygen saturation is holding steady," Xenos reported, a note of excitement in his alien voice. "The extraction process is 87% efficient." Greg allowed himself a small smile. Not bad for a month's work. A commotion at the lab's entrance drew their attention. Mike Simmons burst in, his face pale. "Greg, we've got a problem. A big one." He activated a news feed. Footage showed chaos at a research outpost, bodies strewn across the floor, human and Pac-led alike. "Some kind of bioweapon," Mike explained. "They're calling it the work of a human cult, a Prophet Donovan." Greg's blood ran cold. He looked at Samantha, saw the same drive mirrored in her eyes. Their work was just the beginning. Greg's fist clenched as he watched the grim footage. Bodies sprawled across sterile lab floors, their features contorted in agony. Human and Pakled researchers lay side by side, united in death. Prophet Donovan, Mike spat the name like a curse. Some kind of doomsday cult. They released an engineered bioweapon at the Research Outpost 7. Samantha's eyes narrowed as she studied the carnage. This wasn't just a random attack. Look at the precision, the timing. They knew exactly where to hit us. Greg nodded, a cold dread settling in his stomach. Inside information. We've got a mole. The lab erupted into a flurry of activity. Greg barked orders, coordinating with security teams, and initiating containment protocols. Samantha dove into the data, searching for any trace of the bioweapon's composition. Days blurred together as they worked around the clock. Greg's leg throbbed, a constant reminder of his narrow escape from Stanton's forces. But there was no time for rest. President Alvarez's face appeared on the holo display, her expression grim. "Dr. Hall, we've made a breakthrough in the investigation. You're not going to like this." The president's words hit Greg like a physical blow. General Trevor Collins, his mentor and former commanding officer, implicated as a high-ranking member of Donovan's cult. "It can't be," Greg whispered, but the evidence was irrefutable. Alvarez's voice hardened. "I've ordered his immediate arrest. We can't afford any more." The holo display erupted in static. Alarms blared throughout the facility. "We've lost contact with the president," Samantha shouted, her fingers flying across the alien interface. Mike burst into the lab, his face pale. "Collins is gone. He took a squad of loyalists and vanished." Greg's mind raced. Collins knew every security protocol, every backup plan. If he'd truly turned... A new transmission cut through the chaos. A familiar face appeared on the screen, but Collins' eyes burned with a fanatical intensity Greg had never seen before. "I am the destroyer," Collins intoned, his voice a low growl, "and I will purge this world of the alien scourge." The screen went dark. In its wake, reports flooded in of attacks on joint human Pakled facilities across the globe. Greg turned to his team, his eyes hardened. "We find him. We stop him. Whatever it takes." Samantha nodded, already pulling up tactical data. Xenos shuffled closer, his alien features creased with persistence. As they plunged into the desperate hunt for Collins, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a manhunt. It was a race against time, with the fate of two species hanging in the balance. Greg's heart pounded as he stared at the tactical display. Red dots swarmed across the map, each representing another attack by Collins and his fanatics. "We've lost contact with Outpost 17, Samantha reported, her voice tight. "That's the third one this week." Xenos shuffled nervously. "The Pack-led High Command grows restless. They speak of retaliation." Greg banged his hand on the console. "Damn it, we can't let this spiral out of control. We need to..." The lab doors hissed open. President Alvarez strode in, flanked by security. Her face was etched with exhaustion, but her eyes blazed with perseverance. "We have a lead," she announced. "Collins was spotted near the old Mojave research facility." Greg nodded, already moving. "We'll assemble a strike team." "No," Alvarez cut him off. "I need you here, Dr. Hall. Your work is too important." She turned to Mike. "Captain Simmons, you'll lead the assault. Bring Collins in, alive if possible." Mike saluted crisply. "Yes, Madam President." As Mike's team deployed, Greg threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. Days blurred together in a haze of data analysis and frantic experimentation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mike's voice crackled over the comm. "We got him. Collins is in custody." Relief washed over Greg, but it was short-lived. The true battle was just beginning. Months passed. The Donovan cult was systematically dismantled. With Collins's intelligence, they rooted out the last pockets of resistance. Slowly, painfully, trust was rebuilt between humans and Pakleds. Greg stood on the observation deck of the newly christened Nova Terra colony ship, watching the blue-green orb of Kepler 186f grow larger. Beside him, Samantha squeezed his hand. "Hard to believe we made it this far," she murmured. Greg nodded, his throat tight with emotion. As the ship began its descent, he thought of all they had sacrificed to reach this moment, of the friends lost, the battles fought. The colony flourished. Greg and Samantha found themselves thrust into advisory roles, guiding the integration of human and pack-led technology. Xenos proved invaluable, his expertise on oxygen extraction systems allowing them to adapt quickly to Nova Terra's unique environment. Years flew by. Greg watched with pride as a new generation grew up, never knowing the hatred and fear that had once divided their species. Human pack-led couples became increasingly common, and soon the first hybrid children were born. One day, as Greg was reviewing atmospheric data in his office, Mike burst in, his face pale. "It's Tommy," he said, his voice shaking. "He and Zara, they're expecting a baby." Greg's eyes widened. The implications were staggering. The first human pack-led hybrid? Word spread quickly. While many celebrated this new milestone, others reacted with fear and disgust. Admiral Zorgax, in particular, railed against what he called an abomination. Greg and Samantha threw themselves into protecting the young couple. They lobbied President Alvarez, who granted Tommy and Zara full legal protections. In a ceremony broadcast across 2 worlds, the unlikely pair exchanged vows on Nova Terra's central plaza. Months later, Greg paced outside the medical bay, his stomach churning with anxiety. Zara's labor had started hours ago, but something was wrong. The doctors, both human and pack-led, worked frantically to save mother and child. Samantha gripped his arm. "They'll make it," she whispered fiercely. "They have to!" After what felt like an eternity, a cry pierced the air, alien and human all at once. The doctor emerged, exhausted but smiling. "They're both alive," he announced. "It's a boy." Greg felt tears spring to his eyes as he looked down at the tiny infant. Human eyes blinked up at him from a face that bore subtle pack-led features. In that moment, he knew they had truly entered a new era. "Novan," he said softly. "His name is Novan." As news of the birth spread, celebrations erupted across Nova Terra. But even as fireworks lit up the alien sky, Greg couldn't shake a sense of unease. He knew there were those who would see Novan as a threat rather than a miracle. His fears were confirmed when Zara, her face tight with worry, pulled him aside at the naming ceremony. "We've intercepted communications," she whispered. "Admiral Zorgax is planning something terrible." Greg's blood ran cold. He looked across the room where Tommy and Zara cradled their newborn son. He knew then that their greatest battle still lay ahead. Greg's world exploded into chaos. Alarms blared as Zorgax's strike force breached Nova Terra's maternity ward. Acrid smoke filled the air, punctuated by the staccato of weapons fire. "Get Novan to safety!" Greg shouted, ducking behind an overturned medical console. Samantha and Zara huddled nearby, shielding the newborn with their bodies. Tommy fired his stun rifle, dropping 2 pack-led extremists. "There's too many of them." Zara's voice crackled over the comm. "Reinforcements en route. Hold your position." Greg's heart pounded as he assessed their dwindling options. The ward's single exit was blocked by Zorgax's forces. He met Samantha's eyes, saw the same dogged grit reflected there. A familiar voice cut through the din. "This madness ends now." Orcs, Zara's former mentor, stood in the doorway. He raised his hands, showing empty palms. "I cannot condone the murder of an innocent child." 3 more pack-led soldiers lowered their weapons, moving to stand beside Orcs. The tide of battle shifted. Outside, the city burned. Mike Simmons led a contingent of human soldiers, pushing back Zorgax's troops street by street. Civilians huddled in makeshift shelters, their fear palpable. In the heart of the government complex, Zara faced her father. Zorgax's eyes blazed with hatred. "You betray your own kind for these humans?" Zara's fist clenched. "I fight for our future, not your twisted vision of it." They clashed in a brutal dance, years of pent-up rage fueling each blow. Zara's smaller frame gave her an edge in agility, but Zorgax's raw strength was formidable. Back in the maternity ward, Xenos threw himself in front of an energy blast meant for Novan. The pack-led scientist crumpled, his breathing labored. "Protect the child," he gasped. Greg's calm crackled to life. President Alvarez's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. Admiral Zorgax, you are hereby ordered to stand down. Surrender now or face charges of genocide before the Interstellar Tribunal. A tense silence fell. Then one by one, Zorgax's remaining forces lowered their weapons. In the aftermath, Nova Terra's capital became a symbol of resilience. Humans and Packlades worked side by side to rebuild, their shared trauma forging new bonds. Yet beneath the surface, resentment simmered. Hardliners on both sides pointed to the violence as proof of incompatibility. Greg stood before the Interstellar Alliance Council, his voice steady. We cannot let fear divide us. I propose a great cultural exchange, a true sharing of our people's knowledge and heritage. As plans for interstellar universities took shape, Greg and Samantha sequestered themselves in a secret lab. Pack-led volunteers lay on examination tables, their physiology slowly altering under the influence of experimental gene therapies. The evolution protocols are working, Samantha whispered, studying the readouts. But at what cost? Greg's brow furrowed as he contemplated the ethical implications. Outside, the first generation of human Packled hybrid children played, blissfully unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. Greg's fingers trembled as he adjusted the microscope, peering at the latest batch of gene therapy results. Samantha leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching as the implications became clear. It's working, she whispered, a mix of awe and trepidation in her voice. Greg nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from the cellular metamorphosis unfolding before them. The Packled DNA was responding to their treatments, slowly but surely altering its fundamental structure. A commotion outside the lab drew their attention. Xenos burst through the door, his alien features contorted with urgency. You must come quickly, he panted. The cultural exchange. It's under attack. Greg and Samantha exchanged a horrified glance before racing after Xenos. The corridors of Nova Terra's central complex were chaos, alarms blaring as civilians and personnel alike scrambled for safety. They emerged onto a balcony overlooking the main plaza. Below, smoke billowed from the ruins of what had been the newly constructed interspecies university. Bodies lay strewn across the ground, both human and Packled. No, Greg breathed, his stomach churning at the carnage. A holographic projection flickered to life above the devastation. Commander Kraxar's face loomed large, his eyes blazing with fanatical hatred. Hear me, abominations, he snarled. Your unholy experiments end now. The Packled race will not be defiled by your genetic perversions. The projection vanished, leaving only stunned silence in its wake. Days blurred together as Greg and his team worked tirelessly to combat the bioweapon Kraxar had unleashed. The lab became their world, a frantic race against time, as reports flooded in of Packled test subjects succumbing to the virulent pathogen. Zara proved instrumental, her intimate knowledge of Packled physiology providing crucial insights. She worked side by side with Xenos, their past animosities forgotten in the face of this new threat. We're close, Samantha muttered, rubbing her bleary eyes as she pored over the latest test results. But we're missing something. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the lab's windows, they watched as a crowd gathered, their faces twisted with anger and fear. Signs bobbed above the throng. Stop the evolution! Packled purity now! Greg's heart sank. He'd known there would be opposition, but this... President Alvarez's face appeared on the main view screen, her expression grim. Dr. Hall, I'm implementing an immediate moratorium on all evolution protocol research. We can't risk further inflaming the situation. Greg opened his mouth to protest, but the feed cut off before he could speak. Samantha placed a hand on his arm. We'll find another way, she said softly. Months passed. The bioweapon crisis was contained, but the damage had been done. Public opinion had swung sharply against genetic experimentation of any kind. Greg watched from the shadows as Mike Simmons led a strike team against one of Kraxar's terrorist cells. The battle was swift and brutal, ending with the extremists in custody. As the dust settled, a familiar figure approached. Tommy, his features a perfect blend of human and Packled, nodded grimly. We got what we needed, he said. Zira's already working on decoding their communications. Greg felt a surge of pride. Tommy and Zira had become invaluable assets, their unique physiology allowing them to infiltrate where others couldn't. The final confrontation with Kraxar played out on screens across Nova Terra. Greg, Samantha, and their team watched with held breath as Tommy and Zira's careful work paid off. Kraxar was captured, his network in tatters. But the victory felt hollow. As debates raged over the future of human-Pakled relations, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that they were at a crossroads. Zara approached him one evening, her eyes shining with tenacity. "I have volunteers," she said simply. "Pakled's willing to continue the trials, regardless of the risks." Greg hesitated, weighing the ethical implications against the potential benefits. Finally, he nodded. "Let's begin." Greg nodded, his face tight with certainty. "We'll need to move quickly and quietly. The risks are enormous, but the potential benefits—" He trailed off as alarms blared through the complex. Zara burst into the lab, her eyes wide with urgency. "We've got incoming, multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace." Greg and Samantha exchanged a look of dread before racing to the command center. The tactical display showed a swarm of red dots converging on Novin's position. "It's Chancellor Raxer," Zara growled, her fists clenched. "He's found us." The first impacts rocked the colony, shattering windows and toppling equipment. Greg steadied himself against a console, barking orders into his communicator. "Initiate evacuation protocol Omega. Get all non-combatants to the shelters immediately." Through the view screen, he watched in horror as Raxor's ships unleashed volley after volley of destructive energy. Novan's defenses crumbled under the onslaught, unable to repel such overwhelming force. A familiar voice crackled over the comms. "This is Kaiden Brock, scrambling attack squadrons now." Greg's heart swelled with pride as he watched the young evolved pilot lead his fighters into the fray. Kaiden's ships darted and weaved through the enemy formation, striking with surgical precision before melting away into the debris field. "We need reinforcements," Samantha said, her voice tight with tension. "There's no way we can hold out against this kind of firepower." Greg nodded grimly. "Send out the distress call, all channels." As the battle raged outside, Tommy and Zira sprinted into the command center. "We've intercepted transmissions from Raxor's flagship," Tommy reported, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "They're preparing to deploy some kind of bioweapon, something called Catalyst." Greg's blood ran cold. A genetic reversion agent, he realized. They're trying to undo everything we've accomplished. Zira's eyes blazed with willpower. "We can stop it," she said. "If we can get aboard that ship—" Before Greg could respond, the view screen flickered to life. Mike Simmons' grizzled face filled the frame. "Hang tight, Novin," he growled. "The cavalry's coming." Relief washed over Greg as he watched the Terran Marine Corps vessels drop out of hyperspace, flanked by Borox's pack-led honor guard. The tide of battle shifted, Raxor's forces caught in a brutal crossfire. "Tommy, Zira," Greg said, turning to the couple. "You have a go. Get aboard that flagship and shut down that weapon. We'll create a distraction to cover your approach." As Tommy and Zira raced to their stealth shuttle, another fleet materialized on the edge of the system. Greg's heart soared as he recognized Zara's flagship leading the charge. "Raxor!" Zara's voice boomed across all frequencies. "Your tyranny ends here." Caught between multiple forces, Raxor's armada began to fracture. Greg seized the moment, barking orders to Kaiden. "There's your opening, son! Take us in!" Greg strapped himself into the co-pilot seat of Kaiden's fighter, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. They threaded the needle between flashes of weapons fire, zeroing in on the narrow breach in Raxor's flagship's defenses. As they penetrated the massive vessel's hull, Greg caught a glimpse of Tommy and Zira's shuttle slipping inside moments behind them. His grip tightened on the controls. The real battle was just beginning. The entire ship shuddered as Kaiden expertly maneuvered through a gauntlet of laser fire, bringing them to a skidding halt in a cavernous hangar bay. Greg unstrapped himself, his legs unsteady as he stood. "Nice flying, son," he managed, fighting back a wave of nausea. Caden grinned, adrenaline masking his own fatigue. All in a day's work, old man. They emerged from the fighter to find Tommy and Zara already waiting, having arrived moments earlier. The foursome moved swiftly through the labyrinthine corridors of Raxor's flagship, guided by Zara's innate understanding of Packled's ship design. The bioweapon lab should be 2 levels down, she whispered, her enhanced senses on high alert for any sign of detection. As they descended, alarms began to blare. "They've realized we're aboard," Tommy growled, readying his weapon. The lab doors loomed before them, heavily fortified and guarded by a contingent of Raxor's elite troops. What followed was a brutal, close-quarters firefight. Greg and Tommy provided covering fire, while Kaiden and Zira used their evolved abilities to outmaneuver the guards. With a final deafening explosion, they breached the lab. Inside, Pack-led scientists scrambled to destroy evidence and protect their creation. At the center of the chaos stood a towering containment unit, pulsing with sickly green energy. "The catalyst," Zira breathed, her eyes wide with horror and fascination. Greg moved to a nearby console, his fingers flying over the alien interface. "I can trigger an overload," he said. "It'll destroy the bioweapon, but it'll take half the ship with it," Caden finished grimly. A moment of tense silence fell over the group as they weighed their options. The decision was made for them as the ship rocked violently, nearly knocking them off their feet. "Zara's fleet," Tommy realized. "They're pressing the attack." Greg nodded, his teeth clenched. "Do it," he ordered. As alarms blared and the containment unit began to destabilize, they fought their way back to the hangar bay. Caden's piloting skills were put to the ultimate test as they threaded their way through the disintegrating flagship and the chaos of battle beyond. The shockwave from the explosion catapulted them clear of the destruction, leaving Raxor's once mighty armada in ruins. In the days that followed, as the dust of battle settled and the immediate threat passed, Greg found himself standing before a gathered assembly of human and pack-led leaders. The air was thick with tension and uncertainty. "We've won a significant victory," he began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "But our work is far from finished. The path forward will be challenging, but I believe I have a solution that will secure our future. All of our futures." Greg took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. "I propose we establish an independent sovereign territory for the evolved, a place where we can build a society free from prejudice and fear." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mix of excitement and apprehension. Greg pressed on, outlining his vision for an expeditionary force to seek out a new world beyond the galactic rim. As he spoke, he caught Caden's eye in the crowd. The young pilot nodded, a fierce willpower evident in his stance. Greg knew then that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Finally, the day arrived. Greg stood on the bridge of the lead ship, Caden at the helm, as their fleet prepared to make the jump into uncharted space. "Course laid in, sir," Caden reported, his voice steady despite the enormity of what they were about to undertake. Greg nodded, a mixture of hope and trepidation swelling in his chest. "Take us out, Lieutenant Brock. Let's go make history." The stars stretched into brilliant lines as they leapt into the unknown, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed by their existence. What adventures awaited them in the vast, unexplored reaches of space? Only time would tell.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.